analyze the first one and the second one, I mean X4 and FCI, and also a little bit in FCI's only. And for the FAI, so today you have to analyze the rest one. So for the X4 and FCIs, I think I do hope that all of you can understand and can compare the main responsibility of the sellers and the buyers in the sales contracts for each kind of terms and conditions. So do you have any questions regarding the X4 and FCA? Any questions so far for X4 and FCA? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, any problems regarding the X4 and FCA, so now shall we move to the next one, I mean the FAS. So who can explain about the key point related to the obligations of the sellers and the buyers in the FAS sales contracts? Who want to raise the voice regarding the FAS? Still sleepy?
Hi, teacher.
Sure, please.
Yeah, RAS is the term that free alongside. So the term used in international trade contract that indicates that the seller must arrange for the goods purchased to be delivered next to the particular vessel in a particular port in order to be ready for transfer to a waiting ship. Yeah,
right. Okay, so actually FAS, first of all, the name is representative of free alongside ship, and of course because we mentioned the ships, so it means FAS is a kind of terms and condition used only for maritime transportation or sea freight. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that you have already mentioned that so because it is a free alongside ships, and of course FAS belongs to the F group. So that's why first of all the seller needs to bring the goods to the port. I mean the port of loading, and of course he needs to arrange the goods alongside the particular or specified ships. All right. So that's all for the obligation related to the seller's responsibility in the FAS, and of course the rest ones will belong to the buyers. So that's about the free alongside ships. But I have to tell you a fact that in reality, actually FAS is not so popular because it's sometimes very difficult for the seller to arrange the goods free alongside ships, alongside ships. So that's why in reality FAS is not really popular. How about the FOB? Who can give me some idea related to the FOB?
Teacher,
Okay, sure, please.
FOB means free on board. This rule is used to be used only for sea or inland waterway transport. And FOB means that the seller delivers the goods on board the vessel nominated by the buyer as a named board of shipment. And the risk of loss or the damage to the good pass when the goods are on the board the vessel, and the buyer bears all costs from that moment onwards.
Exactly. Okay. For the FOB, actually, I would like to mention the FOB together with the another two terms and conditions, which means CIF and CFR. FOB, CIF and CFR. Why? Can you see my slide?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. For the FOB, so why the reason why I'd like to introduce together with the CIF and CFR. The reason is the first one is FOB, CFR, and CIF. They are all traditional terms and conditions in the Incoterms in the international trade. They are all traditional ones. So why I call they are all traditionals? Because of several reasons. Because first of all, ICC is so only FOB, CFR, and CIF. So they are the first ones, the first term and condition using in the international trade. And then the other reason is for the FOB, CIF, and CFR, they are all used for maritime transportations only, or the sea freight only. And the most important one is for the FOB, CIF, and CFR, even though they belong to the two different groups, I mean the F groups and C group, but they have the same or common features or common characteristics, which means related to the point of delivery. So you can see that as the opinion of a student in the class that for the FOB, the seller only be considered as fulfill his responsibility when he already loaded the goods on board the vessel. And that kind of things also be correct for CFR and CIF. What I mean is for the CFR and CIF, the seller also has the same obligation or the same responsibility related to the loading the goods on board of the vessel. And of course, it is at the loading port. So even though they belong to the two different groups, C group and F group, but related to the seller obligations, the first obligations of the seller, they are the same. They have the same. They have the common characteristic. So that's very important. But you should remember that the responsibility related to the onboard to load the goods on board of the vessels. That kind of terms only be used in the versions of Incoterms 2010. What I mean is before Incoterms 2010, for example, if we mention to the Incoterms 1000, so instead of using the term on board of the vessels, so actually at that time, the seller had to pass the goods pass the goods over the ship's rail, So I think all of you already be understood about the concept regarding the ship's rail, and also the reason why in the version of Incoterms 2010, so ICC decided to delete the terms related to the ship's rail. And instead of that, they only mention that the seller needs to load the goods on board of the vessels. So that's the term about the on board of the vessels, and that kind of term also be sustained in the newest versions. I mean the version Incoterms 2020. So for the FOB, so even though actually his opinion related to the FOB, I totally agree. But I just would like to emphasize about the main obligation of the seller, similar to the main obligation of the sellers in the CIF and CFR. So please remember about the FOB. So we finished the second group. I mean the F groups. So now let's move to the C group. And of course, I want you to continue with the CIF and CFR. So who can explain further detail information related to the CIF and CFR beside the main obligations that I have mentioned mentioned previously?
Yeah, teacher.
Sure, please.
For CIF, it means cost, insurance, and freight. That the seller delivers the goods on board the vessel or procure the goods are already so delivered, and the risk of loss or damage pass when the goods are on board the vessels.
Okay, that's about the CIF.
Um,
And how about the CFR?
the seller can continue for CIF.
Sure.
The seller must contract for and pay the cost and freight necessary to bring the goods to the named port of destination.
Okay.
It's all for CIF. I think so.
Okay. Thank you. For the CIF and CIF, I think all of you realize about the similar the common things between the two. So the only difference difference between the two terms and conditions. It's about the insurance, buying the insurance obligations. So for the CIF, of course, because you can see that's actually if we make the comparison among the FOB, CFR, and CIF, so in terms of price, so you can see that CFR actually is equal to FOB plus freight. It means in terms of obligation or responsibility of the seller, so for the FOB, the seller only loaded the goods on board of the vessels, so he can complete his responsibility. However, for the CFR, beside that size of obligations, that kind of obligations, so the seller need to hire vessels in order to transfer the goods from the loading port to unloading port. And for the CIR, so beside the transportation's liability, so the seller also need to arrange insurance policy or insurance contracts. What I mean is the seller need to buy insurance for the goods at least up to the port of destinations. So that's about the difference between FOB among the FOB, CFR, and CIF. So we can see it very clearly. And of course, you can see that because based on your opinions, so we can see that from the C group. So now let's see that we have to clarify or to distinguish in between the 2 points: the point to transfer the risks and the point to transfer the cost. So for this, what I mean is for the C group, the 2 points now are different. So it's also the difference between the C group and F group and also the D group. For the F group, you can see that actually the point to transfer the risks are exactly the point to transfer the cost. And it's, for example, with FOB, they are all here. It means at the point that the goods has been loaded on board of the vessels. So at this point, what I mean is all of the risks related to the goods has been transferred from the seller to the buyers, and also similar for the cost. However, for the C group, so we can see that at the loading port here, so this is the point to transfer the risks, but the point to transfer the cost is here, up to the port of destinations, because for the CFR, related to transportation costs, the seller also needs to take that kind of obligations. And similarly, for the CIF, related to the transport and also the insurance costs, so the seller also need to responsible up to the final destination here. So that's why this is the point to transfer the risks, and this is the point to transfer the cost. And similarly, I'd like to mention a little bit more about the D group. For the D group, because the seller needs to do everything up to the final destinations, for example. So it means this is the point to transfer both of the risks and the cost. So this is totally different with the C group. So what I mean is, among the 4 groups, C group is only the groups in which we can see the difference between the point of transfer the risks and the point to transfer the cost. So please remember about that. So how about the CPT and CIP? Who can explain for me a little bit about the CPT and CIP?
CPT is carriage pay to.
Mm-hmm.
With this rule, the seller makes clear to deliver the goods to an agreed point.
Mm.
Often the warehouse of the buyer or his customer.
Mm.
The buyer provides insurance and the seller must arrange the documents.
Mm.
CIP is carriage and insurance paid to.
Mm-hmm.
This rule is actually similar to the previous one,
Mm-hmm.
but with the CIP, the seller must arrange the transport and also the insurance for at least the value of the good.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, thank you. So I'd like to ask one more question. So what is the difference between the CIP and CIF?
Mm,
What is the main difference between the CIP and CIF? And similarly, what is the difference between the CPT and CFR?
the similarities between the CIP and the CIF is that the seller must arrange the transport and the insurance.
Mm-hmm.
But
What about the difference?
I think the difference is the point to transfer the risk.
How to transfer the risks? Okay. Any other opinions about the difference between the CIP and CIF?
Not yet. Sorry.
Not it? Okay. Any other opinions about the difference between the CIP and CIF?
Can I, teacher?
Sure. Please.
I think CIP equals CIF plus I plus F. I and F here it means the freight and the insurance from the unloading port to the point of the point with the seller nominated. It is the point of receiving goods. Yes.
Mm. So,
So as so CIP is larger than CIF.
larger than CIF. Okay, thank you. Any other opinions?
Can I?
Sure.
I think CIF for the mode of transport is the sea transport, and for the CIP is your own mode of transport.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Second thing is a transfer of the transportation. The destination of CIF is a seaport of discharge, and the transfer of transportation of CIP is at the agreed destination of the country at the discharge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
The third thing is the insurance. The insurance of the CIF is coverage up to the sea, and the insurance of the CIP is on the agreed destination of the country at the country of discharge.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other things?
The transfer of the risk of CIF is at the sea part of the discharge, and the transfer of the risk of CIP is to the first carrier.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the one of the
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's analyze one by one. So first of all, I totally agree with you that the difference between the CIF and CIP, I think the most important one is about the mode of transport. The mode of transport. For the CIF, of course, you have to use maritime transport or sea freight. But for the CIP, this is the term and condition that can use for multimodal transports, for any kind of transport modes. So, which means CIP, for the CIP, you can use for the truck, the rail, the roadway, railway. We can use for the air freight. Even we can use for the sea freight. So it means CIP, for the CIP, we can apply for any kind of transportation modes. including the sea freight, including the maritime transportations. But for the CIF, we can only use for the maritime transport of the sea freight. So from that very important difference between the CIP and CIF, so of course you can lead to the other differences like the point to transfer the risks. So if you take a look for the CIF, of course you need to clarify this is the port of loading and port of discharge. But the CIP, we use the other kind of transportation modes, and of course this is the point to transfer the risks. And up to here, this is the point to transfer the cost, right? But if you remember that for the CIP, we can use for the sea freight of the maritime transport. It means if we apply CIP for the maritime transport, it means this is also the point to transfer the risks, and also this is the point to transfer the cost. So that's very interesting. So in that way, it means CIP is exactly the same as the CIF in terms of main obligation of the seller and the buyer in the sales contracts. But if you use CIP for the other kind of transportation modes, of course, we need to change the point of transfer the risk and the point to transfer the cost. All right. And how about because you also mentioned about the insurance liability. It means, of course, for both of the CIF and CIP, the seller has the same responsibility to buy the insurance for the goods. It means for any kind of loss or damage related to our goods that can happen during the transportation process. So he mentioned that for the CIF, of course, usually we only use the minimum clause like a SIC clause. What is the SIC clause? This is a kind of the scope of coverage of the insurance contracts. So that, and this is the minimum scope of coverage. So you can see that it is the minimum clause related to the insurance liability. So for the CIF, usually we buy the insurance from the port of loading to the port of unloading here. So he mentioned that this is a kind of the minimum clause. But the CIP, so of course, if we take a look into this diagram or this picture, so we can see that's actually maybe the scope of coverage for the CIP may be more extended. But in reality, so this is also the very interesting point. The new points or the new changes in the newest version, I mean the Incoterms 2020. So I would like to take this opportunity to explain further about the insurance, insurance liability of the CIF and CIP in the newest version 2020. So for the CIF, because it's only used for the maritime transportations, so that's why ICC they suggested that. For the maritime transportation, because most the kind of goods that we usually use maritime transportation is sometimes like a high volume but low in terms of the price of the goods or in terms of the value of the goods. So that's why if we buy insurance with higher scope of coverage like a B clause or A clause, so it means in generally speaking, we actually the seller, because for the CIF, the seller is the person who needs to buy the insurance. So if we apply the higher scope of coverage of the insurance term and conditions, so it means the CIF price that the seller can offer to the buyer would be more expensive. So for some reason, if the buyer receive a contract received an offer with higher or more expensive price, so sometimes he or she doesn't want to buy our goods anymore. So that's why ICC recommend the seller for if he apply the CIF in the sales contract, so he should apply the minimum clause for the CIF. However, for the CIP, as we have mentioned previously, that because this CIP can be used for any kind of transportation modes. So, for example, sometimes we can use for the air freight, And for the air freight, because usually we have the very high value goods and sometimes low volume goods. So that's why it's more reasonable that we can apply, for example, like a more or the higher extended scope of coverage of the insurance policy. So ICC um, suggests suggested that the seller can apply up to the A terms and condition related to the insurance clause. But actually, that's only the recommendation from the ICC. So they also have the other suggestion that for the CIF, so the popular case is where we should apply the C clause for the insurance. However, if both of the two parties agree, what I mean is the sellers and the buyers agrees, so they can extend the insurance policy up to the B clause or even the A clause. Similarly, for the CIP, even though they recommended us that we should apply the I clause, but if both of the two parties agree, so we can reduce the scope of coverage of the insurance policy. So it means we can apply B clause or C clause. So that's also the very interesting things, the new things in the newest version. I mean the Incoterms 2020. So please remember. So what I mean is in the C group, generally speaking, so in the C group, we have four term and conditions, which are CIR, CFR, CPT, and CIP. And we have analyzed the difference between the CIF and CFR, and also we have analyzed the difference between the CIF and CIP. So in summary, we can see that the other way to approach to the four term and condition in the Incoterms 20 in Incoterms for of the three versions is actually for the CIP and CIF, they are the same. The only difference is CIF only apply for the maritime transport and the CIP apply for the multimodal transport. What I mean is the difference, the main difference stay at the transportation modes. Similarly, for the CPT and CFR, we will have the same analysis. So which means that CFR only used for the maritime transport, but for the CPT, we can use it for multimodal transport. So please remember about that. So that's all for the C group. Any questions so far?
No, not yet.
Okay. Okay. So now let's move to the last group, and also this is the groups that contain many changes via the three versions of Incoterms. For the last group, according to the Incoterms 2010, so we have GIP, DIT, and GDP. But I'd like to introduce with you from the oldest and this is not the oldest, but from the versions Incoterms 2000. So you can see the process of changes among the three versions Incoterms 2000, 2010, and Incoterms 2020. So this is the versions Incoterms 2000. In Incoterms 2000, you can see that's for the G group. So how many terms and conditions that you have? First one is DES, which means deliver X shift. Deliver X shift. And we have GEQ, it means deliver X key. The other two one is DDU, it means deliver duty unpaid. And deliver duty paid. The GDP here is exactly the same as GDP in the Incoterms 2010. And the last one is DAF. It means deliver at frontier. Deliver at frontier. Okay, so let's combine between the two versions. For the Incoterms 1000, so we have the yes, which means X share. And then we have
Em thưa cô, tiếng của cô bị tắt rồi ạ.
Các bạn nghe được không?
Dạ, bây giờ được rồi ạ.
Okay. And then we have DDU and DDP. I hope that all we're familiar with the DDU and DDP because the only difference between the DDU and DDP is deliver duty unpaid and deliver duty paid, which means that the seller for the GDP, it means GDP for the GDP term and condition, the seller has to do everything, including paying the tax to import the goods into the buyer's countries. But for the DDU, even though the seller do everything, but except only one thing that's related to the responsibility to pay the tax in order to import the goods into the buyer's countries. So this is the DDU. And the last one related to the D group in the Incoterms 2000 is about the GAR deliver at frontier. So let me just analyze a little bit about the differences between Incoterms 2000 and Incoterms 2010 related to the D group. So first of all, I'd like you to give me some opinion, some information related to the DAP and DAT. Okay. You can give me the information, general information related to the DAP and DAT.
Teacher, may I?
Sure, please.
Okay, DIPs mean the delivered place, and the means that the seller delivers when the goods are placed at the disposal of the buyers on the arriving means of transport, ready to unloading at the named place of destination, and the sellers bear all the risks involved in bringing the good to the named place. About
Yes.
the DIPs mean the deliver at terminals, and the seller deliver when the goods once unloaded from the arriving means of transport are placed at the disposal of the buyer as the named terminus, as the named post or place of destinations, and in the terminals includes a place where the cover or not such as warehouse containers, yet or rail or air cargo terminals, and it means that the sellers bear all the risks involved in bringing the goods and unloading them to the terminal as the main port of or the place of destinations.
Okay. So, what is the main difference between the DAP and DAT?
I think that the main difference between the DIP and DATs is the place that the parts of transfer the risks and
Transfer the goods. Anything else? Anything else?
Right now, I just think it's about the parts of transfer and the risk only.
Okay, thank you. Any other opinions about the difference between the DIP and DAT? Oh, okay. But actually, DIT, both of DIT and DIP can be used for multimodal transport. Both of them can be used for multimodal transport. So, any other opinions?
I think there are two main differences. The first one is the delivery place.
Mm.
So under the DIT, the terminal include any place with a cardboard or not, such as the key or the warehouse. But under DIP, the delivery place could be any place, just but located further deep in the arriving country.
Mm.
Yes, comparing to the under DIT term. And the second difference is the unloading of the goods from the means of conveyance. So under the
Exactly.
DIT, the exporter must unload the goods from the arriving means at the terminal, at the main port, or the place of destination. Yeah, but under the DAP, the importer must unload the goods. Yeah,
The
so
importer must unload the goods. It means at the time of at the point of delivery, at the point of deliveries, whether the
at the
goods has been
destination.
unloaded or not.
Uh, can you repeat?
So which means that at the point of delivery, whether the goods has been unloaded or not.
Yes, so at the place of destination. Yes, as I understand, under the DAT, the exporter must unload, but under the DAP, the importer must unload.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you. For the DAT and DIP, I think the main difference is about the unloading liability. Unloading liability. So, as the previous opinions about that, actually for the DIT, so the exporter has to unload the goods, and for the DIP, the importer has to unload the goods. So, in the articles, what I mean is for the DIP, so of course you have to choose the one place in which at the point of deliveries. For example, if we choose deliver the goods at the ships, so we can see that the seller only just place the goods or that just remain the goods on board the vessels. And of course it is at the port of destinations. So what I mean is the seller, either the buyer or the importers, need to do everything in order to unload the goods from the vessels. I could choose the other place to deliver the goods, like at our warehouse, at this buyer's warehouse. So we can see that, for example, the sellers after using the ships. So from the port of unloading or from the port of destination up to the buyer premise, so they can use the trucks in order to transfer the goods up to the buyer's warehouse. So up to the buyer, when the truck reach to the buyer's warehouse, so we can see that according to the DIP, the buyer is the one who needs to unload the goods from the trucks, not the seller. So that's why the main difference between the DIP and DIT is about the unloading liability. And of course, for the DIT, the seller only be considered as fulfill his responsibility when he already unloaded the goods from the transportation modes and delivered the goods to the buyers. So that's about the main difference. So the reason why we have such kind of differences. So let's come back to my slide here. So please take a look again about this diagram. So let's analyze a little bit about the DES and DEQ. So as I mentioned previously, that DES, which means deliver X ships, and DEQ, which means deliver X key. So for the DES, it means the seller can be seen as fulfill his responsibility when the vessel already reached the final destination here, the destination port here. However, the goods still on those ships, which means that the seller will not unload the goods. Instead of that, the buyer needs to unload the goods for the DES. However, for the DEQ, It means deliver X key. Deliver X key. It means the ships reach to the destination port, of course. However, the goods has already been unloaded to the key of the destination port here. So which means that the seller already unload the goods from the vessel to the key of this port, and the buyer will come to the key of this port and then receive the goods. So the difference between the GES and GEQ also we can also stay at the unloading liability. So actually what I mean is DIP and DIT in the versions Incoterms 2010 actually be developed from the DES and DEQ. DIP was originated from the DES, which means the goods from still stay on the ships, and the seller doesn't need to unload. Instead of that, the buyer has to unload the goods from the transportation modes. And for the DEQ and DIT also be originated from the DEQ, which means that the goods has already been unloaded from the vessels. In other words, the seller needs to do the unloading liability, and the buyers doesn't need to do the unloading liability. But the reason why we change from the DES and DEQ to the DIP and DIT, because if we use DES and DEQ, so they are only used for maritime transportations, because we already specify this is as ships and this is X key. So they are all used for the maritime transportation only. But if we change to the DIP and DIT, so which means that we can use for multimodal transport for any kind of transportation modes. So it means we extend the DES and DEQ. So now we have the DIP and DIT for the Incoterms 2010. However, as you can see that when I ask you the question regarding the difference between the DIP and DIT, so many of you may confuse about the difference, and you cannot realize about the main difference between the DIP and DIT immediately. So the problem is about the name of the DIT and DIP. So you cannot realize about the difference in terms of unloading liability immediately. So that's why in the newest versions, what I mean is about the version Incoterms 2020, ICC has already changed the name of the DIP. So now instead of using DIP, we have DPU. Do you know what the meaning of the DPU? This is the DPU representative for deliver at place unload. Deliver at place unload. So you can see that for if you deliver the goods at place, it means the goods hasn't been unloaded. In other words, the importers or the buyers need to do the unloading liabilities. So that's the reason why I'd like to analyze with you from the version Incoterms 2000 up to the Incoterms 2010 and now up to the Incoterms 2020 about the changes, about the reason why we need to change, ICC need to change. Clear?
Yeah.
And for the DDU and DDP from the Incoterms 2000, so we can see that the only difference between the DDU and DDP that I have mentioned previously that is about the obligation to pay the tax importing tax in order to import the goods into the buyer's countries. So that's not the big differences. So that's why for the version Incoterms 2010, so they changed that. They deleted DDU and only keep DDP. Only give DDP. And for the DIF is the last term and condition belong to the D group in the Incoterms 2000, which means this is the deliver at frontier. Deliver at frontier. So what is the frontier, or what is the border? What is the point of delivery to choose between the seller and the buyer in the sales contracts? Actually, deliver at frontier, in reality, when the seller and the buyers negotiate the term and condition that can be used in the sales contracts, so they rarely apply the deliver at frontier because they don't understand much about the deliver at frontier. So why? And sometimes they are really confused about the deliver at frontier, because actually in the Incoterm 2000, when they mention about the deliver at frontier, so the actually ICC doesn't explain much about the deliver at frontier. So actually in reality, sometimes the seller and the buyer, they don't understand how to apply the deliver at frontier. And the problem is they don't know what is the suitable frontier, which is the frontier that they need to choose in order to deliver the goods from the seller to the buyers. So the reason is, in reality, when we consider about the frontier between the two countries, so we have two cases. The first case is if we have between the two countries, if we have the common border, like between Vietnam and China, between Vietnam and Laos, between Vietnam and Cambodia. So what I mean is between the two countries, if we have the common border. So this case is very simple, because if you have the common border, so just choose that kind of common border to be considered as the point of delivery, like between the Vietnam and China. So we can choose like a Lạng Sơn common border, or maybe the Lào Cai common borders in order to be considered as the point of delivery. However, the other cases, and this is also the more popular case in reality, is between the two countries, so we don't have any kind of common border, like between Vietnam and Russia. So we don't have any common borders. So what kind of frontier that we should choose in order to use as a kind of the delivery point in the sales contracts? So that is the difficulties in the sales contracts if the sellers and the buyers choose the deliver at frontier. And unfortunately, ICC doesn't explain much about the way how to choose the suitable frontier for sellers and the buyers. However, in reality, actually the reason why ICC doesn't explain in further details about the DAF, about the way to choose the frontier is, ICC would like to let the buyer and the seller more flexible in terms of choosing the suitable frontier. What I mean is, for example, between Vietnam and Russia, so because we don't have the common border between the two countries, but actually between Vietnam and Russia, so we have China in between the two countries. So now, for example, I am the Vietnamese, and I am also the exporter in the sales contracts, and from the Russia's parties, he is the buyer, and in other words, he is the importers. So now I need to do the I need to export the goods from Vietnam to Russia. So if I choose DAF, so I have two ways to do. First of all, if I choose the frontier between the southern frontier, it means we choose the frontier between Vietnam and China to deliver the goods. However, if we want to choose the buyer frontiers, it means we have to choose the frontier between China and Russia. So that's all about the deliver at frontiers. So that's also the reason why ICC doesn't mention anything about how to choose the frontier. They'd like to give us more the flexibilities in terms of these issues. However, this is also can be seen as one of the bottlenecks or disadvantages in the Incoterms 2000. So that's why up to the Incoterm 2010, they already deleted GIF. But I think, in my opinions, we should have one more reason to delete the GIF is actually GIF, it means deliver at frontier. It means we specify a place to deliver the goods from the seller to the buyers. So actually deliver at frontier also can be considered as either GIF, I'm sorry, GIP or GIT, depending on the how to arrange the unloading liability. So which means that's for the GIP, if we choose to deliver the goods at frontiers, so that's fine. And similarly for the GIT, if we choose to deliver the goods at frontier, it's also fine. So for the GIF, we don't need to keep in the ICC. So that's the reason why up to the newest versions in Incoterm 2010, I'm sorry, to the newer versions, Incoterm 2010, so they already deleted the GIF. And for the G group, they only keep three terms and conditions, which are GIP, DIT, and GDP. And remember that's for the newest versions in the Incoterms 2020, DIP has already been changed to DPU, deliver at place unload, to remind you that if you apply deliver at place unload, so of course the unloading liability will belong to the importer, will belong to the buyer. So okay, this is the draft and the diagram for the Incoterms 2010. So I think I already analyzed with you everything. And so any questions so far related to the 11 terms and condition in Incoterms 2010? Any questions so far?
Not yet, teacher.
Okay. So now I'd like to introduce that just a little bit more information related to the changes in Incoterms 2020. So beside, the first thing is DIT is changed to GPU, I already introduced video. And then change of insurance CIP and CIR, I already introduced video about the C clause and how to apply the I clause for the CIP. Costs are clarified. Costs are clarified, which means for the for the term and condition in the Incoterm in the newest version, Incoterms 2020. So for the different terms and conditions, so they mention more clearly about how to break down the costs between the sellers and the buyers. And about the custom clearance, which means related to the export, transit, and import. So similarly, in Incoterms 2020, they are more, it is more precisely explained which parties. What I mean is seller or the buyer is responsible for carrying out custom formality and clearance, assuming the cost and risks there. So it means for the we need to mention to the term and condition in further details like for the ex-work FCA, FAS, FOB, CPT, CF, RCIP, and CIP. So the risk of transfer is transfer at origins. What I mean is the point of transfer of the risks is usually at the point of origins, but for the T group, so the point of the point to transfer the risks stay at the port of destination or the port of destinations. So sometimes you can see that this change will be more clear if the goods has to transfer to many transit ports or many transit point during the transportation process. And the other thing is about the security requirement. Security requirement during the transportation process. So the transport security requirements usually be applied to the goods, especially if our goods has been carried in containers. So for example, for any container, we need to do the screening procedures to any containers. So Of course, when we do such kind of procedures, it raises the cost, and also sometimes raise some kind of risks. So for the Incoterm 2010, generally speaking, Incoterm 2010 just touch a little bit about the responsibility for security requirement and their cost. So for the Incoterms 2020s, it make everything clearer about the security applications. And during the transport of the goods, the security liability is assumed by the parties who execute the carriage of goods contracts. So it's more important that currently we need to understand very well about who will gain transportation rights or transportation liability between the sellers and the buyers, because you know that who gain transportation rights also the parties who has to responsible for the security liability. So as Incoterms 2020 mentioned that the seller for the CPT, CFR, CIF, and CIP, DIF, DIP, DPU, and DDP, which means for the C group and D group, so the seller needs to responsible for. But for the E group and F group, the buyer needs to responsible for. And also for the Incoterms 2020, fortunately, or lucky us that if we apply the Incoterms 2010 or Incoterms 2000 only, so sometimes it's very difficult to arrange the transportation between the sellers and the buyer. Or we need to clarify about who will gain transportation rights between the sellers and the buyer. However, for the Incoterms 2020, so everything has been clarified for each term and conditions. It means if we take a look into the different term and condition in the Incoterms 2020, so immediately we will know that who will responsible for the transportation responsibility. And last but not least, about the IFCA, the change in the IFCA, which related to the bill of lading. So you know that because for the in the Incoterms 2010, so we have three traditional term and conditions, which means we have the FOB, CIF, and CIFR with the common things or common characteristic that the seller only be seen as the fulfill his responsibility when he already loaded the goods on board of the vessel. So that's why the document, what I mean is the transportation documents go together with the three contracts should be on board bill of lading. So don't worry about what is bill of lading or what and the other information related to bill of lading, because we have to spend a lot of time to talk about the bill of lading in the next chapters. So at this moment, I just want you to know that bill of lading is a kind of the transportation document. So for the FOB, CF, and CFR, so because we have the same thing for the three term and conditions. So that's why we have to use the same kind of bill of lading, which means the onboard bill of lading. However, for the FCA, in the Incoterms 2020, they would like to add one more characteristic for the FCA. FCA, so usually when we apply the FCA in the sales contracts, so usually we have to consider whether to use receipt for shipment bill of lading or the bill or onboard bill of lading. Let me just explain a little bit about the difference between the receipt for shipment bill of lading and onboard bill of lading. So the receipt for shipment bill of lading will be assumed if the goods hasn't been loaded on board of the vessels at the port of loading. So for example, maybe the goods stay at the warehouse of the seller or somewhere in between the seller's premise and the port of the port of loading, or maybe at the port of loading but hasn't been loaded on board of the vessel. So in that cases, if the good hasn't been loaded on board of the vessel, so we have to use the receipt for shipment bill of lading. However, if the goods has already been loaded on board of the vessels, so we have to use onboard bill of lading. So that's the difference between the receipt for shipment bill of lading or onboard bill of lading. So for the FCA, the reason why that we have to consider in between the reservation bioblooding and on-board bioblooding is FCI actually are very similar with the FOB. However, the main difference between the two is FOB only used for maritime transportations, meanwhile FCI can be used for multimodal transport. So that's why if we apply maritime transport for the FCI, so it means everything's similar to the FOB. However, if we use other kind of transportation modes like a truck, like a railway, like an airplane, so for the FCI, of course, you can see the delivery point must be totally different with the point of delivery related to the FOB, especially for the container goods. So you can see that's for the container goods. So even though we use maritime transportations, but for the container goods, we never can load the goods on board of the vessel, and then the seller finishes responsibility. So later on, I'm going to explain in further details you do. So sometimes we use container transportations, however, if we use the letter of credit payment method in the sales contracts, so sometimes this is the kind of very popular method of payments in the sales contracts. So it means we have difficulties in between. On the one hand, we have to apply the FCA term and condition in the sales contracts, and on the other hand, we have to apply the letter of credit, which required the seller to submit the onboard bill of ladings. So that's why, in order to cope with such kind of challenge for the FCA in the previous versions, the newest version has such changes. It means for the FCA, if we would like to use the onboard bill of ladings, that's fine. It means the seller, after deliver the goods to the buyer or to the carriers, so whether at the maritime transportations, if we apply the maritime transportations, or in other or apply other kind of transportation modes. So if we, for the container transportations, if we would like to use onboard documents, onboard bill of ladings, in order to make everything suitable with the requirement from the letter of credit payment methods, so we can ask the carrier to issue the onboard bill of ladings. So at this point, because you haven't studied, you haven't learned about the bill of lading and also the different kind of bill of lading, so it seems a little bit difficult with you. However, don't worry about that. So I'm going to back to this problem later on when we go to the next chapters about the maritime transport, and also we have to analyze in very details about everything, all the information related to the bill of lading. So just about one of the important changes in the Incoterms 2020. So that's about all the things related to the Incoterms, and so if you already understood very well about the main application of the sellers and the buyer related to the different terms and conditions in Incoterms, so this so I think it's easy for you to know that for different term and conditions. So in what cases the seller will gain transportation rights, in what other cases the buyer will gain transportation rights. So currently I only require you to use Incoterm 2010 for the newest versions. I just want to introduce with you some more changes so that you can have more information about the newest versions. So for the next slide about the dividing or arranging transportation rights or liability in the sales contract, and also the benefits, and also the case, the benefit of gaining transportation rights, and also the case that should not get the transportation rights or liability. So I would like you to read by yourself. So shall we have 10 minutes break now? And then after the break, I'd like to give you a small test. related to the Incoterm 2010. So now it's 8:37. So we will back at 8:47. Hằng ơi, Hằng lại điểm danh giúp cô nhé.
Dạ vâng ạ. Mọi người ơi, có nhìn thấy màn hình của tớ không? Có.
ơi.
Điểm danh nhé.
Có.
Hà Phương Anh.
Có.
Nguyễn Minh Anh. Nguyễn Minh Anh. Nguyễn Thị Mai Anh. Nguyễn Thị Phương Anh.
Có.
Lê Anh.
Có.
Tạ Diệp Anh.
Có.
Tạ Diệp Anh. Vũ Thị Vân Anh.
Có.
Nguyễn Thị Ngọc Ánh.
Có.
Hoàng Thị Kiều Chi.
Có.
Trần Hà Chi.
Có.
Nathaniel Christopher. Lạc Tạ Tuấn Cường.
Có.
Dung.
Oh, I'm here. Nathaniel
Thị Dung.
Christopher Server's here.
Ok.
Crystal is here.
Nguyễn Thùy Dung. Lưu Mạnh Dũng. Lưu Mạnh Dũng. Ngô Việt Dũng.
Yes. Có.
Lê Tùng Dương.
Có.
Trần Dương.
Có.
Young Con.
Yes, I'm here.
Tú Giang.
Có.
Giang.
Có.
Hà.
Có.
Thu Hà. Đặng Thu Hà.
Có.
Thanh Hà.
Sorry.
Lê Thị Thanh Hà.
Có.
Thị Hải.
Có.
Lê Thị Hằng.
Có.
Nguyễn Nhật Hằng.
Có.
Nguyễn Thị Thục Hiền.
Có.
Lâm Đức Hiệp.
Có nhá.
Trần Hiệp. Bùi Minh Hiếu.
Có.
Bùi Quý Hoàn.
Có.
Nguyễn Thị Lan Hương. Phan Vũ Linh Hương.
Có.
Lê Thị Diệu Huyền.
Có.
Nguyễn Khánh Huyền. Thanh Huyền.
Có.
Trần Anh Khoa.
Có.
Diệu Linh.
Có.
Vũ Yến Linh.
Có.
Diệu Linh.
Có.
Vũ Thị Diệu Linh. Vũ Thị Diệu Linh. Phạm Hồng Loan. Kim Ngân. Phạm Kim Ngân.
Có ạ.
Cao Hồ Thị Ngọc.
Có.
Ngọc.
Có.
Ngọc.
Có.
Nguyễn Thanh Nguyệt.
Có nhá. Bảo Ngọc có nha. Sorry.
Phan Hoàng Nhật. Sunny.
Có.
Đinh.
Được đấy.
Có.
Nguyễn Việt Phong.
Có.
Nguyễn Hà Phương.
Có.
Nguyễn Thị Thu Phương. Nhà. Cao Mỹ Quân. Đăng Quang.
Có.
Matter Kevin Morris Reto. Nguyễn Tùng Sơn.
Có.
Phạm Đức Thắng. Hứa Thị Ngọc Thanh. Hứa Thị Ngọc Thanh.
Có.
Nguyễn Phương Thảo. Nguyễn Phương Thảo.
Nguyễn Mai Thơ.
Có.
Nguyễn Hà Anh Thư. Thư.
Có.
Nguyễn Thị Anh Thư.
Có.
Nguyễn Mai Thủy Tiên.
Có.
Nguyễn Hà Trang.
Có.
Nguyễn Phạm Thùy Trang.
Có.
Phạm Mai Trinh.
Có.
Lê Trung. Lê Văn Trung.
Có.
Diệt Minh Tú.
Có.
Lê Đức Tùng.
Có nha.
Phạm Minh Tùng.
Có.
Trần Thanh Tùng.
Có.
Nguyễn Thị Ngọc Vân.
Lê Trung có nhá. Tớ vừa ghi it is smart.
Nhan Hồng Viên.
Có nha.
Lê Huy.
Có nhá. Có anh có.
Lê Thanh Hiền.
Có.
Mai Tiến Thành. Hoàng Quốc Hiếu.
Có em ơi.
Phạm Quang Hưng. Nguyễn Quốc Anh. Nguyễn Việt Hà.
Có.
Nguyễn Quang Anh.
Có nhá. Nguyễn Quanh có.
Anh.
Có nha.
Thằng ơi. Thằng ơi. Mày xem cho phần chat đi.
Sao cơ?
Các bạn là mày check ở phần chat đi, có những nó bị hỏng ấy, nó không nói được.
Lát nữa tao check sau ấy, bây giờ tao đang kiểm danh cái này, tao điểm nốt đấy. Đâu luôn.